My mother looked straight at me across the dinner table, smiled the way she always did when she wanted to land something soft but sharp, and said, "You know, Jennifer, you're just not quite the woman your sister is." The table went still. Not the polite kind of still, the kind where everyone stops chewing and waits to see what the target does next. Leah, my sister, was sitting 2 seats to my left, lazily swirling a glass of red wine she hadn't paid for. My father was at the head of the table, fork halfway to his mouth, already looking elsewhere. There were 10 other people in that room: my aunt, 2 cousins, a neighbor my mother had recently decided was worth impressing. All of them watching me now, some with pity, some with the quiet relief of people who are glad they're not the one in the chair. I'd heard versions of that line my entire life. The practical one, the dependable one, the one who keeps things running while the star shines. It always arrived wrapped in something that sounded like a compliment, so nobody had to call it the insult it actually was. I set my fork down. The silver clinked against the porcelain, like a bell signaling the end of a round. I pushed my chair back slowly, both hands on the table, no rush. The legs scraped across the hardwood floor, a harsh, jagged sound that cut through the room like a blade. I stood up. I looked at my mother, her smile still frozen in place, confident and cruel. Then Leah, then my father. My mother opened her mouth to add one more twist of the knife. I didn't give her the chance. "Then maybe Leah can start paying your $4,800 rent this month," I said. The room didn't just go quiet. It stopped, like the oxygen had been sucked out of the house. My mother's face didn't just fade, it collapsed. The perfect hostess mask shattered in real time. Leah's head snapped up, eyes wide, jaw tight, the specific look of someone watching a 4-year-old secret begin to detonate in her hands. My father finally looked up from his plate. His face moved through confusion and kept going somewhere further and darker. He said the word quietly at first, as if the syllables were foreign to him. "Rent?" He looked around the table, at the aunt, at the neighbors, at the cousins. His face was graying, his pride evaporating in front of the very people he spent so much energy trying to impress. "What do you mean rent, Jennifer?" he asked, his voice cracking. "We own this place." I looked at him for one long, cold moment, just long enough for the truth to sink into the marrow of his bones. "No, Dad," I said, my voice as steady as a structural beam. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult she'd ever thrown at me. I picked up my bag, walked to the kitchen counter, and set down the sourdough bread I'd brought, the olive rosemary kind he'd always loved, from the bakery on Church Street, because even now, that part wasn't about the money. It was about the daughter they never actually saw. I walked out the front door without looking back. Behind me, I heard Leah say my name once under her breath, a desperate thin sound, like someone reaching for a bridge that had already been demolished. I didn't turn around. I had $4,800 a month to spend on my own life now, and I wasn't going to waste another second of it there. If you've ever been the one actually paying the bills while someone else got the toast, type "me" in the comments. This story is for you. My name is Jennifer Wayne. I'm 31 years old. I'm a senior software engineer at a fintech company in Chicago's West Loop, and I co-founded a financial education app called Groundwork with my best friend Maya Okoffer. As of last Thursday, we have our first institutional contract, $180,000 annually with a credit union cooperative in Indianapolis. 4 months of negotiations, signed and wired. For the past 4 years, I have been sending $4,800 on the first of every month to a property management company called Hargrove Properties LLC. That money covers the rent on a 2-bedroom condo in Evanston, Illinois, where my parents have been living under the complete and unexamined belief that they own the place outright. No mortgage, no deed, no questions. Just a story my sister told them once, a long time ago, that nobody ever thought to verify. I have never spent a single night in that condo. I live in a 680-foot apartment in Wicker Park that my mother calls that depressing little place, and that I call mine. My dining room is a counter with 2 stools. My bedroom is behind a bookshelf. It costs a third of what I send to Evanston every single month. The running total as of the night I walked out that door is $230,400. I know because I've kept a spreadsheet. Every transfer, every confirmation number, every month. Since November of 2021. 48 rows in a file I named tax documents, so nobody would ever think to open it. The people at that dinner table had no idea what was actually holding their life together. They were about to find out exactly what happens when it stops. Let me tell you what nobody at that dinner table understood about me, including, for a long time, myself. I graduated from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign with a degree in computer science and a minor in applied mathematics. I joined a mid-sized fintech startup in Chicago's West Loop at 22, became a senior engineer at 27, and was sitting across from a Series B term sheet on behalf of my employer the same week Leah was quietly filing the dissolution paperwork for her aesthetics clinic. I've had my name on 3 patents in the last 5 years. I've spoken at 2 industry conferences about API architecture and back-end scalability for financial applications. I build systems that hold weight. That's not a boast, it's just what I've always done. Maya Okafor is the smartest person I've ever shared a problem with. We met at a developer boot camp in River North in the fall of 2019, and we started building groundwork from a shared Google Doc and a lot of late nights at her kitchen table in Logan Square. The concept was straightforward: a financial literacy platform built specifically for first-generation professionals navigating things their families never taught them: credit systems, investing basics, employer benefits, retirement planning. People like us, people who had to reverse engineer everything the hard way. We launched a beta version in February of 2023 with 1,100 users. By December of that year, we had 44,000. The Midwest Community Credit Union contract, signed this past Thursday for $180,000 annually, was the beginning of what we believed would become a network of institutional partnerships. Series A conversations had started, quietly, the way important things tend to start. For 2 years, I had been funneling every spare dollar I had into Groundwork's operating costs: security audits, UI design, legal fees, infrastructure, a part-time developer we couldn't quite afford but couldn't build without. I moved money around the way you move weight on a balance beam, carefully, constantly, without letting anything tip. Because the other $4,800 every month, the money that should have been Groundwork's fuel, was going to Evanston. Let me explain exactly how that started. 4 years ago, my parents sold the house I grew up on Elmwood Avenue in Oak Park. 4 bedrooms, a big backyard, a detached garage my father used for his clock restoration hobby on Sunday mornings. They sold it to a young couple for $620,000. The plan, according to my mother, was to embrace city living, the culture, the restaurant scene, the proximity to Leah's studio and the lakefront. Downsize and upgrade at the same time, the way she always framed things. What my mother did not explain, what I assembled piece by piece over the following year and a half, was that $320,000 of that sale had already been promised before the ink was dry. Not to a down payment, not to a retirement account. It was wired directly into the operating account of Leah Glow Aesthetics LLC, a medical spa Lee had been designing for 2 years in her head and 3 months on paper, with an overpriced lease on a Michigan Avenue side street, equipment sheets selected off a showroom floor based on branding, and no licensed medical director at launch. The Evanston condo was rented, not purchased. My parents didn't know because Leah had handled every detail of the move, found the unit, managed the landlord, arranged the lease. She told my parents it had all been taken care of with the house proceeds. They assumed the remaining money from the sale had covered a purchase. They never asked to see a deed because Leah told them the paperwork was being finalized, and my mother trusted Leah the way she trusted gravity, completely and without ever feeling the need to verify it. 8 months after Leah Glow Aesthetics opened on October 3, 2020, it closed. A combination of unlicensed procedure complaints, a supplier contract dispute that went sideways, and a client situation that had begun moving in a legal direction Leah couldn't afford to follow, the clinic shuttered quietly. The $320,000 was gone. Leah called me on a Tuesday night in November of 2021. She'd been crying long enough that her voice had gone flat. She said she needed 3 months covered, just 3 months, she said, until she could stabilize. She said if our parents ever found out that the condo wasn't paid off, that their retirement money had gone into a business that no longer existed, it would destroy them. She said, "Please, Jennifer, just this once." I said yes. That is the thing about being the practical one. People don't come to you because they trust your judgments. They come to you because they've learned that you'll find a solution and you won't make them feel worse for needing one. I was 27 years old, and I wasn't willing to watch my parents lose their home over a secret I hadn't created. So I absorbed it. 3 months became 6, 6 became 12, and somewhere around month 14, repayment stopped being mentioned. By month 20, I had stopped expecting it. I have a folder on my laptop labeled tax documents. It is not taxes. It is a spreadsheet I began in November of 2021, updated on the first of every month like clockwork. 48 rows, one per payment, transfer date, confirmation number, amount, running total. I kept it the way an engineer keeps a system log, not out of resentment, not out of strategy, just out of the ingrained belief that what gets measured gets understood, and that one day understanding it would matter. The AutoSum formula at the bottom of column D reads $230,400. They had no idea I'd been keeping records since the very first check. To understand why I said yes in the first place, why I kept saying yes for 48 months, you have to understand what it meant to grow up as Jennifer Wayne in that family. I was 9 years old the first time I understood that I occupied a different category than my sister. I was walking down the hallway toward the kitchen for a glass of water, past 10 o'clock at night, and I heard my mother's voice through the partially open door, the particular low register she used when she didn't want to be heard. She was on the phone with my Aunt Brenda. I stopped in the hallway in my socks and I listened, the way children listen when they sense that what they're hearing has something to do with them even before they understand the words. My mother said that Steve had never been completely at peace with it. She said that I was already 3 months along when we got married, you know that. She said sometimes he looks at Jennifer and she can see the question he's never asked out loud and that it never completely went away. I didn't fully understand the mechanics of what I was hearing. I was 9, but I understood the weight of it. There was a question my father had been carrying about me, a question with a real answer, an answer nobody seemed motivated to find, and that question lived in the space between us every time he looked at me and decided to look somewhere else. Leah was born 22 months after the wedding, clean, unquestioned. My father taught her to ride a bike on a Saturday morning in April, jogging alongside her with his hand on the back of her seat until she didn't need it anymore. I watched from the bedroom window. For my 9th birthday, I received a card and a Barnes & Noble gift card for $25. For Leah's 7th birthday, 2 years after mine, so I was 9 and I remember it clearly, my parents rented out the party room at the Evanston YMCA. They hired a face painter. They ordered a custom cake from the Sugar Fix Bakery on Davis Street that costs, according to what my mother mentioned to a neighbor while I stood nearby, $420. Leah blew out the candles, and my father lifted her up onto his shoulders, and she screamed with the pure joy of a child who has never once had reason to doubt her place in the world. I told myself it was the age difference. Younger kids got bigger birthdays. I told myself a lot of things. My mother's consistent framing of me, the one she returned to across the years, like a river to its bed, was that Jennifer was the practical one, the reliable one, the one who kept things running. It arrived in my life sounding like a compliment, and it took me years to hear it for what it actually was, a category designed to make my accomplishments feel administrative and Leah's feel aspirational. Practical compared to creative, dependable compared to inspired, valuable the way a good utility is valuable, useful but not cherished. I earned straight A's in high school. My mother attended one of my academic award ceremonies, the regional science competition in junior year, because it was held at the same convention center where Leah had a dance showcase the following weekend, and my mother wanted to see the parking situation in advance. She stood in the back with her coat over her arm the entire time, left before the awards were announced, and texted me later to ask how it went. She attended every single one of Leah's dance recitals, all 11, including the one where Leah forgot her choreography halfway through and improvised badly, and my mother cried with pride in the 3rd row. When I was accepted to the University of Illinois with a merit scholarship that covered 60% of my tuition, my mother told 2 people, her sister Brenda and the woman who cut her hair. When Leah was accepted to a 2-year design certificate program at a private art school in the city, my mother threw a dinner party. 16 people, a catered spread, a custom cake that said, "Congratulations, our creative girl," in gold lettering. I drove myself to Champaign for freshman orientation. My father helped Leah move into her dorm, assembled her furniture, took her out for dinner, and cried in the parking lot on the way out, according to what my Aunt Brenda told me later. I don't say this to assign blame to my father specifically. I say it because by the time I was 18, the pattern was so established that none of us, including me, thought of it as a pattern. We thought of it as just how things were, the water we swam in. Looking back, I should have understood sooner what I was actually being trained to become. I learned early that my value in that family was not in being seen, it was in not requiring anything. The second injury came 9 months ago on a Friday evening in June. I had enrolled in Northwestern's part-time executive MBA program 4 years prior. I completed it in evenings and weekends while working full-time and building groundwork on the side, a logistics exercise that required a level of discipline I never talked about because talking about it would have required someone to ask. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for Saturday morning at Pick-Steiger Concert Hall on the Northwestern campus in Evanston. I sent my family the details in February. I sent a reminder in early May. My mother responded both times with enthusiastic affirmatives that I have since learned to recognize as the verbal equivalent of a placeholder. On the Friday before graduation, at 9:47 p.m., my mother called. She said Leah was in crisis. She laid out the situation with the kind of breathless urgency she usually reserved for actual emergencies. A supplier for a promotional event Leah had been contracted to work had backed out. There was a deposit dispute. The event was the following morning, and it needed to be resolved tonight. My mother's voice had the pitch of someone who had already decided what the solution was and was now delivering the news as gently as possible, which was not very gently at all. She said she and my father were going to spend the evening helping Leah work through it. She said I'd understand. I said, okay. I did not say, this is my graduation. I did not say, I sent you the details in February. I did not say, I have been taking night classes and weekend sessions for 4 years while working full-time and building a company, and tomorrow morning is the only formal acknowledgement this program offers, and I reserved 4 seats because I thought you would want to be there. I said okay, because I was still, at that point, the person who absorbed things quietly and kept moving. I sat in my cap and gown the following morning in the 3rd row of Pick-Steiger Concert Hall, and I watched the 4 seats I had reserved remain empty for the full 2 hours and 14 minutes of the ceremony. The auditorium was full. Families crowded into every row, phones raised, the low hum of anticipation that fills a room right before something official begins. I watched a woman in the row ahead of me hold up a handmade poster with her daughter's name on it. I watched a man 3 seats to my left film the entire processional on a tablet held above his head. When the dean called my name, I walked across the stage and shook his hand and smiled for the photographer with the reflexive precision of someone who has learned to perform composure regardless of what is happening underneath it. In the 2nd row on the left, Maya Okoffer was standing and clapping with both hands raised above her head, and Dorothy Okoffer, Maya's mother, a woman I had known for less than 2 years, was holding a bouquet of sunflowers and crying openly. My phone had 3 texts from my mother when I emerged into the June afternoon. A photo of Leah at the supplier's warehouse, smiling, arm around a man in a polo shirt. A 2nd text with a smiley face. A 3rd that said, "Sorry, honey, sounds like it all worked out on your end, too." I stood on the steps of Pick-Steiger in my robe and read that text 3 times. Then I put my phone in my pocket and went to dinner with Maya and Dorothy. That was the afternoon something shifted in me. Not a break, a shift. The kind that happens underground where you can't see it, but everything above the surface begins to settle differently. The 3rd and final wound was the birthday dinner. You already know how that ended at the table, but there's a part you haven't heard yet, the part that happened in the kitchen before I sat down. Leah had pulled me aside the moment I arrived, before I'd even set down the bread. She looked like she hadn't slept, not dramatically, but in the specific way of someone who had been performing calm for an audience and had let it drop the moment the room was smaller. She grabbed my arm near the refrigerator and said, "Don't say anything tonight, please, about the rent, about the clinic, about any of it." She said it quietly, like the walls had ears, which in that apartment they effectively did. She'd picked the unit herself, after all. I looked at her. I said, "I'm not planning to make a scene, Leah." She exhaled slowly. Then she said, "Good, because if Dad finds out about the clinic money..." I said, "I know." What I didn't say was, "He will find out." And I had already decided that when he did, it would happen clearly on my terms with documentation in hand. I sat down. The dinner unfolded exactly the way it did. My mother delivered the line that she probably thought was benign. She probably believed it was even kind, framed the way she always framed things, as a compliment to Leah rather than a diminishment of me. But it landed where it landed. And when I pushed back my chair and stood up and said those 11 words, I wasn't being impulsive. I was being precise. That was the last night I spent one moment wondering whether I'd done the right thing. After that, I just started finishing what I'd already begun. I need to tell you about Maya and Dorothy because this story doesn't end the way it does without them. I met Maya Okafa at a developer skills bootcamp in River North in October of 2019. She was sitting directly across a long communal table from me, working through a back-end architecture problem that I had solved twice in my career in 2 different contexts. I watched her for about 4 minutes before I said anything. Then I leaned across the table and pointed at her screen and offered a simpler approach. She looked at me, assessing, precise, not remotely offended, and said, "Yeah, that's cleaner." We've been solving things together ever since. Maya grew up in Oak Park, 10 minutes from the house on Elmwood Avenue where I grew up. We'd been circling the same geography for years without crossing paths. She's a front-end engineer with a design instinct I've never had and have learned to stop pretending I'll develop. I build the engine, the architecture, the data pipelines, the systems underneath. Maya builds everything the user sees and touches. Groundwork exists because of what happens in the space between our 2 skill sets, and also because of what happens when 2 people who grew up being told they'd have to figure things out themselves finally decide to figure them out together. Her mother, Dorothy Okafor, is 64 years old. She taught 8th grade mathematics at Percy Julian Middle School in Oak Park for 31 years before retiring. She has a lilac plant on her front porch that she has kept alive for 11 years. She has a standing poker night on the 2nd Thursday of every month with 3 women from her church. She has strong opinions about almost everything: interest rates, meal preparation, the structural integrity of mutual funds, and she delivers them the way she must have delivered math lessons, gently, with patience, but without softening the facts. The first time I met Dorothy was at a Sunday dinner Maya invited me to in January of 2020, about 3 months after the boot camp. I almost manufactured an excuse. I almost invented a work obligation the way I sometimes did when invitations felt like they required me to be known rather than just functional. I went anyway, mostly because Maya had asked twice. Dorothy shook my hand when I walked in. She said, "Maya's told me about you." She said she'd heard I was the kind of person who kept things from falling apart. I laughed, the kind of laugh that escapes before you decide to let it, because it was funny in the specific way that true things sometimes are. Dorothy laughed too. Then she told me to sit down and handed me a bowl of something that smelled like my understanding of what home was supposed to feel like. I didn't know then that I was sitting at the table I'd been looking for my whole life. Dorothy was at my MBA graduation without me asking her to be. Maya had mentioned the ceremony in passing, and Dorothy, who at that point had known me for less than 18 months, had driven 40 minutes from Oak Park, found street parking near campus, bought a bouquet of sunflowers from the Trader Joe's on Green Bay Road because she'd noticed once that I always stopped when we passed a flower stall. She sat in the 2nd row. She held those flowers through the whole ceremony, and she cried when my name was called. She noticed. That's what I keep coming back to. In a family where I had become functionally invisible, Dorothy Okafor noticed what flowers I liked. When groundwork nearly ran out of operating runway in the summer of 2022, we had 11 weeks of capital left and a sales pipeline moving slower than our burn rate. I didn't tell my family. I told Maya, and Maya told Dorothy. Dorothy called me on a Sunday afternoon and said, "Come over." We sat at her kitchen table for 2 hours while jollof rice simmered on the stove, and she asked questions about the business with the focused attention of someone who had spent 3 decades figuring out where students were stuck. At the end of the conversation, she said, "I have $15,000 in savings that I don't currently need. I want to put it into groundwork. No contract, no timeline, no percentage. Just build it right." I tried to refuse. She didn't let me. When the Midwest Community Credit Union contract closed this March, the first wire I sent from Groundwork's new revenue account was $15,000 to Dorothy. She called me when it landed. She said, "I told you." Then she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I'm proud of you, Jennifer. I want you to know that." I had to sit down when she said it.
I had heard a great many things said about me in 31 years: practical, reliable, difficult, too sensitive, not quite the woman my sister was. I had been evaluated, categorized, and explained in terms of what I provided, but I had never once heard a person who had watched me work say those 6 words in that sequence. For the first time in 31 years, I understood what the word family was actually supposed to mean, and I knew, in the quiet, matter-of-fact way I know when a system is working correctly, that I was never going back. What I didn't know yet was what going forward was actually going to cost me. I was about to find out. The morning after the birthday dinner, I logged into my bank's payment portal and deleted the recurring transfer to Hargrove Properties, LLC. $4,800, removed from my outgoing schedule. I sat with the screen for a moment, the way you sit with sudden silence after a sound you'd stopped hearing. Then I opened Groundwork's operating account and established 2 new recurring transfers: $2,200 per month to infrastructure scaling, $1,800 to a product development reserve Maya and I had been discussing for over a year. The remaining $800 went into a personal account I'd been ignoring. I sent Leah one message before 8 that morning. It said, "I've stopped the rent payments effective this month.
You'll need to make other arrangements. I'm available to discuss logistics, but not to continue the current arrangement." That was the complete message. No explanation, no apology, no opening for negotiation. She called 9 times in the following 3 hours. I let every call go to voicemail. To my mother, I became brief in a way that left nothing to argue against. "How are you? Fine. How's work? Busy. Are you coming to Sunday dinner? I can't make it." 1 or 2 sentences per exchange, friendly enough to read as normal, empty enough to offer no traction. I didn't explain, I didn't fight. Silence, I had finally understood, was not the same thing as surrender. It was the most effective form of patience I had. Leah escalated first. When the voicemail stopped working, she switched to text. The text started practical, asking about the landlord's contact information, asking whether there was a grace period, asking if I could just cover 1 more month while she sorted out a new income source she was vague about. When I didn't respond to those, the tone shifted. She said I was being cruel. She said I was doing this on purpose to humiliate her. She said she'd always known I resented her. I read every message once and filed them without responding. They interpreted my quiet as defeat. Of course they did. They had known a version of me for 31 years, and that version had never stayed quiet this long without eventually bending back toward accommodation. My mother posted a video on Facebook the Sunday after the dinner. The condo's wraparound balcony, soft afternoon light, a cheese board, 2 wine glasses, Leah in the emerald dress. The caption said, "Sunday mornings with my beautiful girls, best view in Evanston." Leah commented, heart emojis. My father liked the post within 20 minutes. 2 Saturdays later, Leah posted a photo from the building lobby, a new handbag with a logo that functioned as its own announcement, held up at shoulder height in front of the mailboxes. She tagged the Evanston address. My mother commented, "My girl, always." 3 fire emojis. I looked at the post for a moment, noted the date, which was already 12 days past Hargrove's first late payment notice, and closed the app. A cousin I'd stayed in loose contact with texted me to ask if everything was okay, that she'd noticed I wasn't in any of the recent photos. I said everything was great. I was not being ironic. In the same 2 weeks, Groundwork's monthly active users crossed 80,000. Maya and I were fielding 3 inbound investor calls per week. I had begun talking quietly with the real estate agent about a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. I went to Dorothy's on Sunday instead of Evanston. Meanwhile, the Hargrove Properties account was now 31 days past due, then 58. A formal notice of late payment was issued on March 14th, sent to the condo address and copied to my email per the term of the lease agreement because I was the leaseholder of record. I read it over coffee at 7:15 in the morning. I filed it in a folder I'd been building for 4 years. They thought my silence was surrender. They had no idea it was the sound of a foundation being poured. Leah called me on a Thursday afternoon, 43 days after the last payment. She wasn't crying this time. She was beyond that. Her voice had the flat, dry quality of someone who had moved through panic and come out the other side into a kind of grim practicality. She said the landlord had sent someone to the building, the property manager had spoken to the front desk, a notice had been left on the door, and neighbors had seen it. She said my father had been asking about a mortgage statement that should have arrived in February and hadn't. She said, "You need to fix this by Sunday." I said, "What's Sunday?" She said, "Dad's actual birthday dinner, just the family, the small one." I said, "I'll be there."
I spent Thursday and Friday afternoon preparing 3 sets of documents, 12 pages each: the lease agreement, the payment ledger, and the Leah Glow Aesthetics LLC corporate filing with the bank transfer records attached. I printed each set, organized it with numbered tabs, and clipped each copy separately. I put it in a leather portfolio I use for investor meetings. I pressed my blazer. I arrived at 6 on Sunday evening. Maya was with me. She hadn't asked whether she should come. She'd said, "I'll drive." My father opened the door. He looked like a man who had been trying to hold something in place that kept shifting. He said my name. He looked at Maya and said, "Come in, both of you," with the careful courtesy of a person who was afraid that small gestures of normalcy might still hold things together. My mother was in the kitchen. Leah was on the couch. Nobody was talking. I sat down. Maya sat beside me.
My mother came in from the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands, saw us, and ran through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds: surprise, calculation, and the tightening around the eyes that I recognized as her management mode activating. She said she didn't know I'd been bringing someone. I said, "This is Maya. You've met before." She said yes, hello, and did not look at Maya again. My father sat down across from me. He said, "Your sister says there's a situation with the building." I said yes, I'd like to walk everyone through it. I opened the portfolio and placed 3 document packets on the coffee table. I didn't hand them out yet. I said the first document is the original lease agreement for this unit, Hargrove Properties LLC, 2240 Sherman Avenue, Evanston, signed August 1st, 2019. The leaseholder of record is Jennifer A. Wayne. That is me. It has always been me. My mother started to speak. I kept going. The second document is a payment ledger, 48 wire transfers from my personal account to Hargrove Properties beginning November 2021 and ending this past February. Each transfer $4,800. The total is $230,400. That number covers every month of rent for 4 years. Leah was absolutely still on the couch. She had the expression of someone watching an inevitable outcome arrive. My father said, and his voice had gone very quiet, the way it went when he was actually processing something rather than reacting to it. He said, "I don't understand. We own this unit." I looked at him directly. "Dad," I said, "you've never owned this unit. There is no deed. There has never been a deed." I picked up the third set of documents. The corporate filing for Leah Glow Aesthetics LLC, incorporated in the state of Illinois on January 14, 2020. The initial capital contribution to the LLC's operating account was $320,000. That money was wired from the account holding the proceeds of the Oak Park house sale. The business closed on September 22, 2020. My father didn't move. He didn't look at my mother. He didn't look at Leah. He looked at the paper. I said, "The condo in Evanston was rented from the beginning. Leah arranged the lease, moved you in, and told you it had been purchased. When the clinic closed and she could no longer make the payments, I agreed to cover it temporarily. That was November of 2021. I've covered it every month since. The money you believed bought this apartment is gone." The room was silent in a way I'd never heard a room be silent. Not uncomfortable silence, collapsed silence, the kind that follows something structural giving way. Leah said my name, just once, quietly, the way you grab a door handle when the floor goes soft beneath you. I looked at her. I said, "I know you didn't plan for it to go this long. I believe that. But I can't keep planning around you, Leah. I'm not able to do it anymore." My father stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room and his hands in his pockets, looking out at the Evanston skyline, the same view my mother had posted on Facebook with the caption, "Best view in Evanston." He stood there long enough that the silence resealed itself around him. Then he turned around and he said, very quietly, directed at Leah, "Where is the money from the house?" Leah started to cry, not the performative kind, the real kind, the kind that sounds ragged and ashamed. My mother said, "Let's not," she said, "this isn't the moment to." I said, "Gina, let him ask." She stopped. My father looked at me then. For the first time in as long as I could remember, he looked at me not as the practical one, not as the category he'd placed me in, but as a person he didn't fully know and was realizing in real time that he should have. I reached into the portfolio one final time. There was a fourth document. I had carried it for 3 weeks without being certain I would use it. I had decided on Thursday morning that the truth was the truth, regardless of what it cost the people hearing it.
The document was a DNA ancestry test result, the kind of commercial test you order online for $89 and receive in the mail 3 weeks later. I had ordered 2 kits, one for myself, one that I had left on the kitchen counter of this same apartment at the birthday dinner, labeled in my handwriting as a birthday gift idea alongside the sourdough bread. My father liked origin stories. He liked puzzles. I knew he would send it in. The results had come back in late February. I had been sitting with them ever since. I placed the document on the coffee table. I said, "You're my father, Dad. The match probability is 99.998%. You've been my father every single day of my life. There was never a question that needed to be asked. There was only a question that was never answered." He looked at the paper for a long time. The room held its breath. When he looked up, his eyes were doing something I had never seen them do in 31 years of looking at me. He said, "Jennifer," and then he stopped, because there wasn't a sentence that followed that was equal to what he needed to say. I stood up. I said, "The lease terminates in 60 days. Hargrove has already been notified that I won't be renewing. I'll send you the documentation by email this week. You'll need to make housing arrangements." I picked up the portfolio, I nodded at Maya, we walked to the door. I didn't wait for the reaction. I had already seen everything I needed to see. Groundwork closed its Series A funding round 6 weeks after that Sunday in Evanston. $4.2 million, led by a venture firm that had been following our growth numbers since November. Maya called me at 7 in the morning when the wire confirmed, and we stayed on the phone for an hour talking about things that had nothing to do with money. That evening, Dorothy made dinner, and the 3 of us sat at her kitchen table until almost midnight. The $4,800 that used to leave my account on the first of every month now goes into a payroll fund. We brought on our first 2 full-time engineers in February, one in Chicago, one remote in Austin. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park in March. High ceilings, an actual dining table, a second room I've set up as a home office. Dorothy helped me pick out a rug on a Saturday afternoon. It's a deep terracotta color. It makes the whole room feel like it was always supposed to look that way. My father sent me a text 3 weeks after the Sunday in Evanston. I could tell from the cadence of it, the way it started and started again, that he had rewritten it several times. He said he didn't know how to say what he needed to say, but that he wanted me to know he was trying to figure it out. I wrote back, "You don't have to say it right now." That wasn't forgiveness. It was something more precise than that. It was the acknowledgement that some debts aren't repaid in words, and that whether he does the work that follows is his responsibility, not mine, to carry for him. He is 60 years old. What he does with what he knows now is the only thing left that matters. Leah is working through the deferred liabilities from the clinic that surfaced once the full financial picture became clear. Creditors she'd been quietly deferring for years, a supplier dispute that had never fully resolved, obligations she'd borrowed time on and eventually ran out of. My mother has gone quiet in the particular way she goes quiet when her audience has left the building. The condo on Sherman Avenue was returned to Hargrove Properties LLC on April 1st. I've been thinking about something Maya said to me the night before the Series A closed. She said you spent 4 years funding someone else's ceiling. Now you get to build your own roof. I've been thinking about what I was told across 31 years about what I was. Practical, reliable, the bricks. Not quite the woman my sister was. What I understand now, what I wish I'd understood sooner, is that the bricks were the building. The bricks were the whole structure. Every column that holds weight, every beam that keeps the ceiling from falling, every foundation that makes the floors above it feel safe. That's not the boring part of architecture. That is architecture. I wasn't the unstable element. I was the foundation they never bothered to look at. And the day I stopped holding them up was the first day I learned what it felt like to stand.